Andy Duke.
Hey.
We're live on Facebook, not yet on radio.
Hi.
Here we go.
You got these chairs are comfy but very
Aren't they?
low.
I know.
It's like you're towering
It's
over.
a
It's
psychological
really, it's
thing.
like a dominance move.
I asked, could the guest please be lower
Lower,
than
right,
I am?
yeah.
Actually, TC said, you're not going to make Andy sit in that chair, are you?
I was going to pull over the other one.
Yeah, that would have been nice.
Thank you.
But then I couldn't dominate the conversation.
Oh, for God's sakes. All right, Mike's coming hot.
Okay.
Hey, Andy Duke is lots of things, not the least of which is a guest in my studio. Author of Thinking in Bets, co-founder of the Alliance for Decision Education. What's that, by the way?
So we believe that better decisions lead to better lives and a better society. And if you think about K through 12 education, lots of trigonometry, not a lot of education about how to make a good decision, all the way from kind of identifying what a habit is to probabilistic thinking to how would you actually construct a decision and think about your options and figure out what the result of your decisions might be. So this is really lacking. People will get it in college as an elective. So what we're doing at the Alliance is bringing interested parties together and trying to accelerate the movement around bringing decision education to K through 12. You can kind of think about the same way that all of a sudden STEM became a really big movement in K through 12, or social emotional learning became a really big movement in K through 12. We're trying to do the same thing for really skilling up kids with decision skills.
In other words, you think that kids today lack decision-making capability, or they have the ability, they just don't execute sound decision-making?
Well, let me ask you a question. When you were in
No
K
math,
through 12,
Andy.
no math.
Okay.
When you were in K through 12,
Right.
did you ever have a class where they taught you how to make a decision?
No,
No,
definitely not.
Not. So maybe by college you do. So do you think you would have used that more than, say, trigonometry?
Oh, definitely.
Right.
I think that what was best for me in terms of decision making, and I still make a lot of bad decisions.
We all do.
But law school sharpened the way that I assess a situation, and it's constantly with me. And trying cases for 10 years also impacted the way in which I appraise a situation and then make judgments based on it. I'm just wondering, like, okay, how does that actually work in a classroom setting? How can you impart decision-making capability to students?
So people can go onto the Alliance website. Actually, it's the Alliance for Decision Education. If you search that, it will come up. We have lots of programs, all the way from teaching people what a habit is, how you might change a habit, to a fantasy football program that teaches kids about the way that cognitive bias gets in the way of their decision making, to how do you think probabilistically. In other words, when you make a decision, there's many possible futures that could occur. How do you think about what those possibilities are and how often each of those might be likely to happen? So there's lots and lots of tools on there, and you can lay it on top of other subjects. So if you think about it as you're teaching history, you can think about what were the people thinking about at the time, what was the information they had, what were the different ways that it could have gone, how likely was the way that it did go, what might have been the result had it not gone that way. There's lots of things, for example, in World War II where there's certain things, I think there's something having to do with Germany actually coming into France that was very, very low probability. And you can discuss, okay, that was low probability, what does that mean? What were the decisions that got made afterwards? What were the decisions that got made beforehand? And so you can actually teach history or English through that lens, and you can certainly teach math through this lens.
Is some of this applying, people know you not only for your work as an author and your public speaking, and I like to think of you as a game theorist. I don't know if you like that label or
No,
not.
it's fine, yeah.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
Is this, and obviously something you exhibited in your poker skills.
Yeah.
Is this applying game theory to life for kids?
So the interesting thing about game theory is that game theory's real application has to do with human decision making. So the father of game theory, a guy named John von Neumann, who did a lot of other things, by the way, he ran the Manhattan Project.
Not bad.
He was looking at how do you kind of model decision making where you have lots and lots of people making decisions and lots of uncertainty. In other words, luck gets in the way, right? You can go through a red light and still get it through fine, or a green light and get in an accident, so that's luck. And you have hidden information, so you know things I don't know, and I'm trying to make decisions under those circumstances. That's really what game theory came out of, and it's applied to human decision making across the board. So as an example, von Neumann was the architect of our Cold War strategy, because that's just an application of game theory. But that's true as well as you're thinking about what college do I want to go to? What are my goals? How do I reach my goals? You can't go to a college that you've already experienced by definition. So you're trying to decide about what college you want to go to, and you can't know for certain if you like it, for example. You're trying to balance out the priorities think about being a parent, balancing out your priorities with your kids' priorities. That's an application of game theory.
You co-authored an essay for the Wall Street Journal with some similar themes, by the way, under the headline, "The Problem with Believing What We're Told." Yeah. And you can lay out in a moment what the whole thesis is of this, but something that I circled that you wrote was this. You said, the good news is there's increasing evidence that the needed critical thinking skills can be taught. Mm-hmm. I always wonder this. I hope that my wife and I raised our 4 to have some street smarts. Part of me thinks you're either born with it or you're not. What can you tell me about the evidence that says critical thinking skills can be taught?
So first of all, let me just a shout out to my amazing co-author, Gary Marcus.
Okay.
He's incredible, and he actually, I want to give him another shout out. He has a book coming out next week called Rebooting AI, which is amazing. It's about what the future of AI looks like.
I'm interested in that, so I will get the book and we will get him in here on your recommendation.
He's amazing.
Good.
He's incredible. So I just want to shout out to my fabulous co-author. And we happen to be academic brother and sister because we both studied under the same person at Penn. So basically, what there's mounting evidence that shows that you can shift people's ability to make good decisions, particularly around the piece that we wrote is around fake news and why fake news is so incredibly powerful. And what they're finding is that you can actually get people to think more critically about what they're reading. So there's a few things. One actually just came out this week, so it's not in the piece in the Wall Street Journal, by Vanderlinden. If people look on my Twitter, they can find the article there, where they found that if you get people to play a game where they become producers of fake news, in other words, you're teaching them kind of the tricks of the trade, and you score points by being a better fake news producer, that it seems to inoculate them. It's like a vaccine against fake news. So then they believe fake news less because they're able to sort of spot it better, having produced it. So, and there's a site where you can go play the game yourself. That's also in my Twitter feed, so people should go look at that. There's a great evidence, there's a study that just came out which showed that when people are just sort of reading, fake news, like everybody, whether you're Republican or Democrat, if it agrees with you, you're more likely to believe it. But if you just have them do a second step where they have to make a rating of the believability of the headline, so it's just this extra step where they have to take a step back and say, let me think for a second, if I had to rate this, how believable do I think it would be? They actually get much better. It actually reduces the effect of kind of that partisan bias. And then the interesting thing is that it increases their skepticism about articles that they haven't rated the headlines of. So it just gets you into a more skeptical point of view about what you read. They've even shown this with children. There was work done where they were teaching kids, it was a program called Philosophy for Children, and just teaching kids to sort of think philosophically, kind of in the same sense of, one of the things that I think law school does really well, and before that sort of debate does, is it gets you to think about sort of how do I think about how could I argue either side of this? How do I look at my side of it skeptically? And that's, I think, what the Philosophy for Children intervention is doing, is it's getting kids to think more critically. And so you just become kind of less gullible under these interventions.
But shy of putting someone through an exercise of, okay, you come up with some fake news, now you'll understand better how susceptible people can be to fake news. I'm just wondering if we can impart to one another and to kids that they need to have a bullshit detector, that they need to be street smart, that they need not to just accept things at face value, because I see so many who do. Nothing is as personally unsettling to me as being taken advantage of by someone who sells me a bill of goods. And when it happens, it sticks with me for a long, long time, because I like to think of myself as being wise to, what am I trying to say, flim-flam.
Yeah.
And fake news is flim-flam.
Yeah, so there was actually another study that was done, we kind of obliquely cite it in the piece, where they showed that basically internet literacy is correlated with the ability to spot fake news. So what do I mean by internet literacy? Like, how are you reading it? Are you looking at, are you actually looking up the information? Are you verifying it? How much are you actually verifying what you're reading? So on and so forth. Those kinds of skills are really highly correlated with the ability to spot fake news. So this comes back to what we're doing at the Alliance for Decision Education, which is we're not teaching our kids these skills. We're, again, teaching them, trigonometry and calculus and things that are really highly specialized forms of math that you would only use, for example, if you were becoming a structural engineer, as an example. So, there's some very small percentage of the population that's going to need trigonometry, but I would argue that the whole population needs classes in internet literacy and information literacy, and how do you verify information? How are you reading across the aisle? How are you understanding what the source of the information is, and how that lends or doesn't lend credibility to what you're reading? And we're just not skilling kids up in this.
You're really talking about teaching critical thinking skills.
Correct.
To use the language I like to repeat. Let me just tell you a few other things that I've highlighted in the piece that you co-authored with Gary Marcus. The simple act of repeating a lie can make it seem like the truth.
Yeah, so this is a highly replicated result. The original result comes from Lynn Hasher in 1977. Phil Tetlock, who's at the University of Pennsylvania, has also talked about this. So what she found, the original result that's been replicated, is that if I give you a list of statements, some true, some false, and I look at your ability to figure out which ones are true and which ones are false on the first exposure, and then I do the exercise with you 3 more times across, say, 3 weeks, and some of the statements I repeat, by the 3rd time that you see a false statement, you are as likely to rate it as true as the first time you see a true statement.
Just from repetition.
Just from repetition. On top of that, it gets worse, because not only is it repetition, but if I start to add other things to it. So, for example, if I give you a picture with a false statement, that makes you much more likely to believe it. Now, it doesn't make you believe things like, if I said to you something like, bunnies are the only animals that can jump, and I put a picture with it, you're still going to say that's false. I mean, everybody knows about kangaroos, right? But if I give you something that's a little bit more difficult, like if I say,
get by me, go ahead.
If I say giraffes are the only animals that can't jump, and I put a picture of a giraffe with it, you're much more likely to rate that as true than if there's no picture with it.
And similarly, if there are unimportant details attached to it, it becomes more believable.
Right, so as I embed it in sort of more context, if I give it kind of just contextual language, but not context that has to do with whether it's true or not, just extra words, basically.
I totally get it. So more words, pictures, and repetition, you've got a winner of a false story you can sell.
Right, and not only that, if I add moralizing language to it, now it really goes crazy. So if I add words like hate or destroy, for example, even moralizing words that are on the positive side, like love, will do this as well. And that was work from Jay Van Bavel's lab at NYU. And he showed that it's so powerful that for every word like that that's contained in a tweet, the tweet is 20% more likely to be shared.
So if I want to put out a false story in a political context, I'm going to put it out multiple times, have a photograph associated with it, some seemingly meaningless details that I'll weave into the story, and I'll throw in the word hate.
And your golden.
And something else that I learned from you from this essay, by the way, it's in my Twitter feed, as is your Twitter handle, and it's posted at Smerconish.com. So the people who are driving right now and want to know more from Annie Duke, it's in the Twitter feed, or go to Smerconish.com. Fake news stories, 70% more likely to be retweeted than true stories. Why is that the case?
Yeah, so that's work out of MIT. Well, it has to do with really, because of this moralizing language, this seems to cause the sharing. So you can kind of think about it as it's this real catch-22, right? In order for me to actually give you a story that has the layers that it needs for it to be thoughtful, it has to have lots of nuance. Journalists are trained actually to avoid moralizing language, right? They're not supposed to use language like that. They're certainly not supposed to use partisan language. So you get these nuanced stories that aren't containing all of these words. Now, when you do the fake news, all those rules go out the window, and it really activates people to start sharing. So again, I think one of the reasons why it's 70% more likely to get shared goes back to Jay Van Babel's work, because it contains these words like hate and destroy and so on and so forth. And for every single word like that, it's 20% more likely to be retweeted. So these words, these moralizing words, this really emotionally activating way in which fake news is communicated, causes it to go viral. It causes it to be shared. Not only that, when you look at fake news, the work out of MIT shows that it's about, I think it's 6 times harder for a real news story to get to a benchmark of 1,500 people seeing it as it is for a fake news story.
Isn't that because the fake news stories tend to be the most salacious?
Yeah, because of the wording.
Hillary took a fall, and all of a sudden somebody spins it that she's on her deathbed, and it's like, oh my God.
Yeah.
Where the truth is just sometimes not as exciting.
It's just not as exciting. It doesn't contain these really activating words by nature, because the truth is not as black and white as what the fake news stories kind of put out. And one of the ways that we can think about, like, how do we think about what's true or false? And like I say, Phil Tellock's talked about this, Cass Sunstein has talked about this a lot, has to do with processing fluency. Like, how easy is it for us to understand the message? And the easier it is for us to understand the message, the more we think that it's true. So if you think about it, repeated messages over time become easier for us to understand because we've heard them before. When you have a picture with it, it becomes easier to understand. It creates a more vivid way for us to sort of connect what's being written. When you have these very highly emotionally activating words, we understand what the message is trying to say better, and it activates our amygdala, which is the sort of, ooh, this is danger area. And that just causes there to be more processing fluency around it. So we just think it feels more true to us.
Can you give me something? Can you leave us with something tangible as we enter the next phase of the 2020 cycle that we should have our guard up and be thinking about as we evaluate all the information that we're about to be bombarded with? I mean, how do we then decipher in this context fact and fiction?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a couple of things that you can take from this, which is, if there's, some sort of crazy picture with a story, be suspicious. If the headline has a lot of moralizing language, be suspicious. If it's very black and white, be suspicious. So I think what we want to do is, we have our initial reaction, and then before we share something, what we want to say is, hold on a second, can I verify this? How true do I really think this is before I hit send? And really start to question for yourself, how much do I want to be sharing fake news? How much do I want to be that person who's doing that? And I think that as we start to sort of take a step back and sort of view ourselves from the outside and say, if I were someone on the outside looking at this, would I think that this is true? And I think that if we can sort of take that extra step, we're going to be better at spotting it. We're not going to be perfect, but we're going to be better at it.
A final question. You ever get taken in? You are so smart. You are so academically wise and street smart. Do you ever get sucked into something that you realize via the internet, or in another example, hey, it's just not true, and I was believing it for a while?
Of course. So, I mean, I think the thing is everybody does. So the question is, there's literally no way that I can make it so that you are perfect at spotting fake news and only sharing real news, right? I can't do it. But what I can do is I can make it a little bit better. And if you think about it, if I can make you better at it, think about how that compounds across every single person in society. If you could reduce, if you right now could wave a magic wand and you could make it so that people were 10% less likely to fall for fake news, you would wave that wand. So, yeah, you can look at it as, well, I mean, they're still falling for a lot of fake news. Sure, but they're 10% less likely to do it, and that's good for society.
I would wave the wand, but there are a lot of people who do what I do for a living who wouldn't want to wave that wand because they'd lose their constituency. You know, there's a profit motive to keeping fake news alive in many media outlets. That's the reality. I think that's a large part of what's gotten us into this problem.
Well, I think that that's true, and I think that that's why we as media consumers need to start being really responsible for what we consume and what we don't consume, and what we believe and what we don't believe in. And part of the problem is that we know from Dan Gilbert's work that that when we're distracted, that's when we're most susceptible. And if you think about the way that you're consuming information on the internet, it's just you're constantly distracted. You see one thing, another thing comes in, another thing comes in, another thing comes in. And that distraction kind of cuts off the verification step. It just stops you from verifying. And then what we know is that when you cut off the verification step, it's not that you believe some false things are true and some true things are false. It's that the default is to believe that basically everything is true. It goes in one direction. So now all of a sudden false things feel true. It's not that, but true things also feel true.
Annie, that was great. Thank you so much for
Thank
coming
you.
back in studio. Your most recent book is Thinking in Bets.
Yes.
Anything you want to say about a forthcoming book, or should we just let it go with that?
Well, you can pre-order it if you want. It's called How to Decide. But if you pre-order it, you're going to have to wait like 9 months to get it.
Okay, well, you'll come back and tell me about that closer in time.
Thanks.
Thinking in Bets, Annie Duke. Thank you, Annie, for being here. I'm going to say so long to Facebook Live and continue on with the program. By the way, if you want to call and respond to a lot of those issues, they're all in play, including, are you susceptible